So I went to sleep that night, and I told myself, no one ever has to know.
Really?
I'm never telling anyone. This was such a shattering experience. It was so, to be that sheltered little girl and to have something like date rape, which that term in and of itself was foreign to me. It shattered everything that I knew to be true about the world I lived in.
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
What a heartbreaking comment. It is horrifying to hear how many girls and women are sexually assaulted like Kathleen was. The statistics are shocking. On average, a woman in America is raped every minute of every day. But the numbers don't reflect the shame, anxiety, and the broken lives that victims face afterwards. I'm John Fuller, and our host Jim Daly was out of town when we recorded today's Focus on the Family. I sat down with two courageous women, Kathleen Terrill and Leila Sommerfeld. They told their stories of hurt, hope, and healing after sexual assault. We'll be discussing some very mature topics, of course, so I suggest you direct smaller ones out of the way as you watch this video. And now here's my conversation with Kathleen and Lila. Lila, let's start with you. Many years ago, an awful thing happened to you, and it just changed your life forever. Take us back to that time and tell us when that was and what the circumstances were and what happened.
Okay, well, the event happened the year that John F. Kennedy was killed. Mm-hmm. I remember that distinctly. And we lived way out in the country. We didn't have any neighbors. I could see some neighbors below us. There were canyons, but we couldn't talk. And so our house was pretty isolated. And a neighbor, I didn't know him, he was way far away, had broken into my home and raped me while my children were in the house just a few feet away in another bedroom. And both of the doors were open. And I was so fearful, I didn't resist because I was so fearful that they would be harmed or they would see what was happening. I knew what was going to happen. It put so much fear into me. I didn't want to be alone at night. And I always begged my husband to come home before it got dark. And I used to carry a gun with me when I go out to feed the horses. I mean, just how much it paralyzed me.
So you were in an isolated location.
Yes.
The rapist broke in the middle of the night. Your husband wasn't home?
He ironically had gone to Mexico with my father to pick up a car. My stepmother had died down there.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't expected to be back before midnight. And I don't know how this person knew that he wasn't coming back early. I have no idea.
But it was a nightmare that wouldn't...
He turned off the lights to the house. Up there they
he
didn't...
cut the power?
Yes, he turned off the power. And he ran to the front door and the back door and banged very loud. I mean, very loud. I thought that was going to wake the children up. And we had dogs, and they were barking and barking. And then he came up from behind me and grabbed me and pushed me into the bedroom. And so I just didn't want my children to see or hear anything.
Yeah, in fact, I think in your book, Beyond Our Control, at one point, you said you felt more like a criminal than a victim.
Right. I felt like a criminal. And especially when I was asked for a polygraph. Of course, I understand they do that all the time. I didn't at the time. And I thought, gosh, how couldn't they tell by the way I looked and acted? And of course, I passed it. But I did. And then it was just a really hard thing. And then when I first went to go before the judge, I was by myself. And I don't know why I didn't have my husband go with me.
Yeah, I was intrigued by that part of your story, that you grew up in a dysfunctional home and you had kind of always taken care of yourself.
Always taken care of myself.
Managed things.
And managed. My mom had a lot of serious mental illness. She couldn't help it. And so I didn't have any close relatives. I didn't have anybody to talk to. And my older sister was out of town.
And all of that led to you being in a courtroom by yourself?
Yes, coping by myself. And, you didn't want to go to your pastor, and you didn't want to tell everybody. For some reason, we just feel shamed or embarrassed.
In your book, Lila, you described something that you call an alarm reaction state.
Well,
and
we go
you
into
said that affected you quite deeply.
Yes, we go into post-traumatic stress, and post-traumatic stress, you're constantly looking over your shoulder. You're jumping at things, and of course you're very suspicious of.
And this became not just a little episode, but it became kind of an umbrella
It
for
took
how
over
you
my
operated
life.
in life.
It took over my life, and for years I would sleep with my gun by my bed, my car keys. I was determined to make a quick getaway, and of course now I know Jesus is there. I don't, Jesus. But at the time, I was so traumatized. I couldn't even think about Jesus or God, or I just wanted that gun. I used when my husband was out of town one time. I slept at the front door with those things, the gun, the keys,
And this kind of PTSD effect on you and your emotional well-being and your physical health really took a toll.
It really
It took a
affected.
toll on your marriage as well, didn't it?
It took a toll on my marriage, and I, at the time I didn't realize, and in my book I say I didn't realize my husband was going through this also in a different way.
Yeah,
He didn't know how
what
to.
were his reactions?
He tried to be loving, but he didn't know what to do with me. And I really, if that had happened today, I would have been in counseling. I would have been in support groups. I would have had a Christian support group. And I think I went to a psychiatrist once, and I didn't talk about my rape.
Oh.
I talked about my father.
Oh, really? So there you are in the aftermath. You've got years of stress and hypervigilance and
Panic
and
attacks.
fear, panic attacks, and you're finding nobody is able to
There
help
was
you.
nobody.
And your husband eventually left?
No, actually, I divorced him, and because I was so distraught, and my mind was so. I almost think I was crazy at the time, because I did end up checking myself into a mental hospital for 3 months. I couldn't cope. And I didn't know what to do. And of course, the enemy said, "Well, he's not helping you, so maybe you'd be better off without him."
So what did you do after you left him then? I mean, did you
I
try to
tried-
find a place and settle down? Or?
I took the girls, got an apartment, tried to get a job and go to work, but I was in such severe depression. I couldn't work. I cried and cried and cried. I couldn't stop. Any woman that has had any kind of sexual assault. Because, for one thing, when you go through trauma, it changes the wiring in your brain. And your brain is not the same. It doesn't mean you can't heal and move forward, but you think differently and you're wired a little bit differently. And
you didn't find anybody you could trust. You didn't find anything that would alleviate that pain and that stress and anxiety.
well, I did. My sisters were very comforting, but they both lived out of town, and my niece, who's only 13 years younger than me, is very comforting. But again, everybody lived out of town.
Yeah.
And my two closest friends, they were very kind. They were supportive of me, but they didn't know what to do with me.
Wow. Well, I appreciate so much your vulnerability, Lila, and that's Leila Sommerfeld. We're also talking with Kathleen Terrill on today's Focus on the Family. And Kathleen, your story is different, but you went through a traumatic rape experience as well. Take us back to that time, what life was like before and during and after that event.
Absolutely. I was raised in a very loving Christian home. I had an amazing relationship with my parents and my sister, and just kind of that all-American family environment. I was also attending a private Christian school, and the senior year of my high school, at the age of 17, 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, a group of friends and I were planning to go out for the night and just hang out together. For whatever reason that night, everyone decided to cancel, except for this one other guy in the group. And this guy was new to our school. I knew of him. He kind of had that bad boy image that was very intriguing to the sheltered girl in me.
So you're a little attracted to that aspect of life.
Yes, it was intriguing. I wasn't necessarily attracted to him, but that persona was intriguing to me. So he invited me over. He said, well, why don't we just go to my parents' house and we can just watch a movie. Everybody else is canceled. So let's just, we're already out of the house. Let's go ahead and go hang out. So I agreed. We went over to his parents' house, and I believed his parents were home. I later found out they weren't. And as we began to watch the movie, we're sitting on the couch, and he began to make advances towards me, trying to kiss me. And honestly, I thought it was hysterical, like it was a joke, because it was the farthest thing that could be possible for my imagination for what he was trying to do.
He was probably not impressed by that response.
Not at all, I'm sure. I'm sure that probably hurt his ego a little. And so I laughed and was, come on, what are you doing? We're not like that. We're just friends. And then we're going back to watching the movie, and he tries again. And so a little more forcefully, I'm like, come on, knock it off. It's not like that. You know that. And then he tries a third time. And by this point, I'm getting angry. And so I shift in my seat and I began to stand up to leave. Like, I'm not going to tolerate this. And as I stood up, he then grabs me by the shoulders and forces me to the ground. And he forces me to the ground and pins me to the ground, and then begins to tear and rip at my clothing to remove them. And I remember that moment so vividly, thinking, this cannot be happening. What is happening right now? My mind could not comprehend the events that were taking place. And so he does. He begins to rape me. And I remember in that moment tilting my head backwards, and there was a clock behind my head. And I remember just fixating on that clock, trying to put my attention somewhere other than to what was happening in that moment. And I remember looking at the clock and fixating at it, and then suddenly everything went black. And I woke up, kind of came to, and I'm still looking at the clock and realized 45 minutes has passed. And I have no idea. I think it was really God's grace. But I don't have a whole lot of vivid memories of that 45-minute time frame. But 45 minutes had passed. And so I stood up, tried to gather myself, and I drove home. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember walking into my parents' house. But I remember going into my bathroom that night and just the shock and the horror as I used the restroom and just found myself covered in all this blood. And so I went to sleep that night. And I told myself, no one ever has to know.
Really?
I'm never telling anyone. This was such a shattering experience. It was so, to be that sheltered little girl and to have something like date rape, which that term in and of itself was foreign to me. It shattered everything that I knew to be true about the world I lived in.
And it's obvious as you go back to that time that the emotions are still churning and that the pain is still very, very real to you, Kathleen.
I do believe that the Lord has completely healed me of the pain, and God's grace has been profound in my life and how He's brought healing. For me, the emotions are still so strong because of my love for other girls and for other women who go through it.
You indicated, Kathleen, that you decided nobody ever had to know.
Right.
Why was that? The stigma, the shame, the embarrassment?
The shame was immediate. The shame was immediate, and it was palpable. The fear and the shame was completely overwhelming. And in that moment, my entire world had been rocked. Everything I knew to be true felt foreign suddenly. And that shame and that guilt felt almost like the only thing that seemed real. That shame and that guilt were so profound that I clung to those.
And this seems to be a very common reaction for victims of sexual assault.
Yes.
That a flood of emotions, guilt, etc., as you've just shared.
Absolutely.
And did that cloud of secrecy, that desire to keep all of that part of your life hidden, did that work for very long?
Well, in the coming weeks from my rape, I began to get sick. And as I got sick, it never occurred to me to take a pregnancy test. However, it was obvious that I had become pregnant via my rape.
And that certainly will expose the secret, won't it? Yes. Because everybody then is eventually going to find out.
Right. And so that's where that fear came from, that if I was to share that I had been raped and that now I'm pregnant at my private Christian school, that there would be disbelief, that no one would believe me, that I'm using perhaps rape as a cover-up story, and that would be the cover-up story for the pregnancy.
And Lila, this is all very common to assault victims.
It is so common. I have been leading my recovery classes for at least 15 years, and they all, if they'll write down what they want to be healed of, they'll write down shame. And it's just, I think part of that is because until now they're just coming out against sexual violence, and we have a lot going, organizations working to eliminate that. But the enemy says, first of all, they won't believe you.
Mm-hmm.
They'll call you a bad girl. Well, why were you there? What were you
why
wearing?
didn't you fight back? Those kinds of things. Yeah.
Or why did you go there? And so we think maybe part of us, we are to blame. Maybe I should have been more careful or something like that.
Kathleen, did you experience those kinds of thoughts?
I knew that I was not to blame.
Okay.
However, there is this kind of twisting of thoughts that the enemy most decidedly tries to do. However, I knew very clearly that I had said no multiple occasions, that I had tried to leave, and I was physically restrained from being able to fight back. However, that's what rape is. It's not a sex crime. It is a violent crime, and it's all about power and control. And that's exactly what took place in my rape.
And going back then to the moment that you discovered you were pregnant, I'm sure your mind was racing.
Yes.
Did you decide at that point to start sharing what had happened?
No, I did not.
Okay.
So I continued to hide. I continued to withdraw. I pulled away from friends. I did what needed to be done in order to graduate and to finish out my senior year in high school, but I did not share the information with anyone. I literally lived with that secret throughout the continuation of that senior year in high school.
Okay.
It came to my graduation day, and I'm walking across the stage on graduation day, and the headmaster hands me my diploma and shakes my hand. And it was almost as if a light bulb went off in that moment. I'm standing on the graduation platform with the diploma in hand, and it's like a light bulb went off. And suddenly I became acutely aware of, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. And what am I going to do now?
I just got my diploma. I have a child. I'm going to have, oh my goodness.
So it was kind of like in that moment, I had gotten to the point where, okay, they can't kick me out of school now, and now I've got to face this thing. So I began to research. I love researching. I love gathering information. And I began to just scour and research what I felt would be the right thing to do to going forward. And I found what appeared to be a wonderful adoption agency and home out of state. And so I decided that the best and most loving choice that I could make would be to place my child for adoption. And so I then knew that I could perhaps continue this story and make my friends think maybe I'm moving out of state to go to a different college, but my parents would have to know.
And so the time came when you chose to tell your parents?
So I invited my mother to lunch.
And how long is this after the rape had occurred?
It had been a few months at this point. So I invited my mother to lunch and said, I need to share some information with you. And I began to share with her about the rape and about my plans to place the child I was carrying for adoption. And my greatest fear, throughout this whole time was that no one would believe me. And as I'm sharing with my mother, who I loved more than anyone, she and I were so very close, she began to question me in almost an interrogation style line of questioning, just question after question after question. And as she's questioning me, it occurs to me that she's trying to find a hole in my story. And oh my gosh,
she does not
believe me. And that was crushing. That the one person I finally have confided in, the one person I love and respect and honor, does not believe me. And in that moment, my mother looked at me and she said, you are not going to place this child for adoption. You are going to have an abortion. And again, this is my mother, who is a godly woman. We were in the church, just an amazing Christian family. And to hear those words come out of her mouth, like my world was shattered. And the darkness I had been living in just grew immensely in that moment.
And was that then what you had to do?
Yes.
Is have an abortion?
So I was shattered, and I did not say no. And I remember that clinic so clearly, showing, you have a sonogram done, but yet at that point in time, the screen's turned away. I'm not able to look at the screen. There's no sound of the heartbeat. There's no evidence shown to me of the life that was growing inside. And so we go through with the procedure, and I remember the sound so clearly, and just feeling so absolutely alone. An interesting part to the story is there was a chair in that room, and I remember just needing something to focus my attention on and feeling so alone. And so I sat and, as the procedure's going on, I'm staring at this chair in the room. Many years later, the Lord took me through an amazing ministry time of healing. And it's called Kairos in our church. It's an appointed time with God where you get to just come and experience his love wash over you. And I remember in that time, I said to the Lord, I know your word is true. And your word says that you never leave us and that you never forsake us. And will you show me, God, where were you when I had that abortion? And he instantly gave me the most beautiful picture. And it was a picture of him, Jesus, sitting in that chair in the abortion room. And he was holding my hand. And his hand, one hand was on top of my hand, and the other was underneath my hand. And he was stroking my hand, gazing into my eyes in the midst of this procedure taking place. And he spoke 2 words to me that forever wrecked me. He said, I understand. Now, was he saying the abortion was okay? Absolutely not. But he understood me, and he didn't run away. He understood my pain. He understood what I was experiencing, and showed me that he was there with me through it all.
Well, you two both have tremendous stories of pain, of difficulty. That's a beautiful illustration of God being there, although he probably didn't feel like he was there at the moment. There are women listening right now who have gone through abortions, and they don't have that kind of closure that you had, Kathleen, or Lila, women who years later are still wondering, why didn't God stop that? How do you grapple with those questions?
Well, God doesn't stop everything. He doesn't stop everything. But like Kathleen said, he is there. And when people said to me, well, where was Jesus? I said, I can tell you where he was. He was standing in the doorway of my children's bedroom.
Protecting them.
So they would not hear or see anything. That's where he was. And I truly believe now, you couldn't have convinced me of it way back then, but I believe now God does allow some things to happen in order for the healer to go on and become the healer. And people like Kathleen and I and hundreds of other women have gone on to have their ministry to reach out to women who are still in pain and have covered everything up, and come to classes and seek healing and find Jesus at the heart of it.
Yes, for sure.
That is a really profound way to wrap up this part of the conversation. And we want to come back next time and talk more about how God shows up in those moments. And we'll look forward to that conversation next time. What a profound way to wrap up the first part of our conversation with Kathleen and Lila. And if the stories that these women have so courageously shared today have stirred something in your heart and mind, if they've brought up some pain in your life, let me encourage you to reach out to us here at Focus on the Family. We have caring Christian counselors, and they're waiting to hear from you. They'll listen to you, they'll pray with you, they'll offer hope and encouragement. I'd also urge you to get a copy of Lila's book, Beyond Our Control, Restructuring Your Life After Sexual Assault. Now, if you can give a gift of any amount to Focus today, we'd love to send a complimentary copy of that book as our way of saying thanks for joining the support team. Of course, if you can't afford to make a gift, As Jim has said, others will cover that, so please let us know. We'll send a copy anyway. We want you to have this resource. We'd also love for you to join our pro-life movement. We're calling it See Life Clearly, and you can start by going online and signing the Declaration for Life. That's a way you can publicly show your passion and support for babies and moms with unplanned pregnancies like Kathleen. Sign it and tell others to sign it. We'd like to take 1 million signatures to Washington, D.C. And then finally, we have a major event on May 4th, a live from New York, where in Times Square on the big screens, we're going to be showing a live 4D third trimester ultrasound so everybody can see God's handiwork. Find out more and get in touch with us by calling 800-A-FAMILY or click the link on your screen. On behalf of Jim Daly and the entire team, thanks for watching, and I'm John Fuller, inviting you back next time as we once again help you and your family thrive in Christ.